This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. Now, the Stuph File presents Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy. It's radio that's out of this world.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy, is a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and the author of National Geographic's Backyard Guide to the Night Sky, and also National Geographic's Stargazer's Atlas, the Ultimate Guide to the Night Sky. And Andrew, Voyager phoned home on an antiquated system. I'm assuming it must have been a collect call.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty much the most extreme kind of phone call you could ever imagine. It's amazing that it can be done. The feat is incredible. So just to set the scene, we're talking about a spacecraft that was the forerunner as the robotic ambassador for humankind out into the entire solar system. It basically did a reconnaissance of all the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, after having launched in the late 1970s, 1977. It flew by Jupiter in 1979, Saturn in 1980. It's literally 24 billion kilometers away from us. It's about the size of a subcompact car, if you can think about it that way. It just is the farthest spacecraft from Earth that humankind have sent. And it's incredible. After so many decades, it's still functioning enough that it's doing analysis of where it is in space. It's past Pluto. It's gone into officially interstellar space. So it's a really big deal. On board, there's a radioisotope thermoelectric generator that supplies enough electric power to run a few instruments, including the radio transmitters that are on board. And so what's been interesting is that there's been hiccups already with the transmitters, and it seems like a few weeks ago, it flipped into the backup transmitter, which works at a much more lower energy, and the signals are much more feeble. The engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California were thinking they were not going to be able to, they thought they lost the spacecraft, which, by the way, has happened numerous times in the last few years. They thought it's dead, but it's like the Energizer Bunny. It just keeps on going. And even though it was using its backup communication system, which, by the way, it hasn't used since 1981, They didn't even think this was even functioning, the S-band transmitter. It worked. And even though they flipped basically their instruments to start listening in this backup S-band as opposed to the X-band, which is a much more stronger way of communicating, they picked up the feeble signal and were able to get back into communication with the spacecraft. So it's incredible. They don't know exactly what's going on. They're hoping that they can flip it back to the stronger form of communication through the X-band. We'll have to wait and see. And that should play out in the next few months. They said it may take a few months for them to resolve all the issues. But the main point is that we're still in communication with this spacecraft that launched in 1977.
Wow. It seems to be that they've written this thing off for dead several times in the past. And these are the guys who built the thing. I'm just wondering, does it give them any aha moment in going forward with other things that they have built that only had a certain lifespan? Like, for instance, the rovers on Mars, they seem to be extending their life to a certain degree more than what they was initially planned for. Does that change the way they build in the future because they realize that there are checks and balances, and of course NASA always does things with a redundancy plan in mind, that they can now build things thinking about how it will go on beyond their point of warranties, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I mean, with Voyager, the wish list that they had was, what they wanted to do and is look at all the outer planets, which they did. Everything else that beyond that was, cherry on the cake. Did they ever envision it being, functioning out to this? I think on paper, between the engineers who built it, they probably said, well, look, I mean, it has this thermonuclear, generator on board. It technically should be able to, the plutonium breakdown, the heat that it's generated and how that's converted into electricity, all of that was on paper possible. Did they actually think that it would happen that way? I don't think so. I think there was that remote possibility that it would survive. I mean, we're talking over 40 years plus. And by the way, the lifespan, they're looking out now, knowing what they know now, they've readjusted their thinking. 2036, so another 12 more years they think they can get out of the Voyager one. But I think it really set the mark in terms of what the lifespans of robotic spacecrafts can potentially be. And yes, we, as you mentioned, we see that playing out on Mars with the rovers going way past their due date, their warranty, so to speak. That space does. The environment of space, while being extreme, if you build the spacecraft in a hardened way to withstand that extreme environment, it can actually almost preserve the spacecraft for much longer periods of time. Now, on Mars, these rovers won't last as long as Voyager because of the rough and tumble environment that Mars does put them through and all the dust storms and everything. Eventually, it'll catch up to them. But Voyager 1 is kind of like almost like cocooned, is just hardened, and it's working on minimal energy. Theoretically, it could just go on forever if it wasn't for the thermoelectrical generator that'll eventually, give out.
You mentioned all of Voyager's qualifications. You forgot one major point. And that is, of course, it was the plot point for Star Trek, the motion picture.
I knew you'd bring that up. I was waiting. I was like, when is he going to bring that? Yes, that's right. It's pivotal. Of course, what was that, Voyager 7? The mythical Voyager 7, which I think, right? Was it 7?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
It was.
Or Voyager.
Yeah, Voyager. That's right. As it was redubbed. Yeah, that's right. Because of the alien race. Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, very interesting that you bring that up. I mean, right now it's sitting 24 billion kilometers away. It takes 23 hours for the signal to come to Earth, by the way, one-way trip, right? Think about that. That's how long. At the speed of light, the radio signal takes almost a full day to reach us. So it's a very slow communication. But if we look into the very distant future, Voyager will probably, in about 40,000 years from now, will pass within 1 light year of a nearby star. That's about 4.3 light years away. You kind of wonder, is there going to be any other alien race looking at this little emissary, with the gold plaque, right, that's on board and everything. So it'll be interesting.
Well, we have just about a couple of minutes left, and I want to talk about China because they're planning to make their space station bigger.
Yeah. So this is something to take note. I mean, it'll pan out over the next few months and years. It's basically 3 modules that the Tiangong space station that China has put up as a rival to the International Space Station. It was finally fully assembled a couple of years ago, actually, in November of 2022, and now they're thinking of expanding it further. It's 3 modules in a T formation, and they want to make it into a much larger X formation, if you can think of it, with more modules being placed for scientific instruments and tests and being able to house more astronauts eventually. And this is all part of China's long-term vision of having a permanent presence in space for the country. And of course, it involves going back to the moon, and their space station is a stepping stone towards that. So it just really reaffirms that China is here to stay when it comes to space exploration.
And for those who are into space and know about the ISS, let's do a comparison. How much smaller is it than the ISS? And because of China building onto it, will it eventually be bigger than the ISS?
Well, that's a good point. It's a guessing game if it will. I mean, right now the space station is literally a fraction. I think it's like 1/10 of the size of the International Space Station, which is the size of a football field and can house upwards of a crew of 10, whereas the Chinese space station normally houses 3 to 4 astronauts at most. There's a long way to go for China to catch up to the International Space Station. However, things may change because once they do expand, at the same time, the ISS is going to be drawn down in terms of its use. It'll be retired probably within the next 6 to 8 years and shut down, basically. Once that happens, Tiangong, China's space station, may be the only one that humanity has in orbit left.
Unless, again, I would assume some private companies would be doing the next space station.
Could very well happen, and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos would have a hand in that. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, we're just about out of time, and I still wanted to get to the moon's history, because some samples that were collected a half a century ago are being involved in a new study. So can we go to Patreon and talk about that, among other things?
Let's do it. There's just so much to talk about.
Okay, thank you very much.
Clear skies.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0797, and you'll find links to Andrew's site to get your own personal autographed copy of his books. Patreon subscribers, you can hear more of Andrew as a Patreon reward extra, where we'll discuss studying the rocks from the moon 50 years later, Starship's most recent test launch, and what the U.S. government is saying about UFOs. Just go to our Patreon page, and if you are not already a member, become one of the select patrons of the show. Visit patreon.com/The Stuph File Program.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.